Alright everyone, we're back here with another edition of Budget Magic. This is Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and today we are going to be playing a blue-red Mindswipe Counterburn control deck for Standard. As you can see, not too expensive. Paper prices come in at just about 93 bucks. Online, only 33. The difference is mostly based on a couple of expensive cards. Ugin, for example, is much cheaper on Magic Online, as is Dig Through Time. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about this deck. The idea of this deck is, as you will see, we don't have any real creatures. We have Keranos, which will never actually be animated into a creature in this deck. So we don't have anything to get hit by Ultimate Price, BioBlight, Hero's Downfall, all those removal spells that are so popular in this format. So this deck manages to give our opponents a lot of mulligans, because a lot of decks are playing those cards, and we just make any of those cards horrible top decks, horrible in your opening hand. So a lot of times it's like our opponent starting on 6 or 5 cards, even when they keep their 7. So that's part of the idea of this deck. So apart from giving our opponents mulligans, the idea is to counter everything that matters, and then eventually burn our opponent out. The card that encapsulates this the best is Mindswipe, the namesake card. Mindswipe is blue-red X for an instant, counters target spell unless its controller plays X, so it's like a spell blast or something, spell burst, and then Mindswipe deals X damage to that creature's controller. So it's also a little bit like a Banefire or something that only goes at your opponent, can't hit creatures. Anyway, sometimes you can Force Spike with this card. Hit a Courser on turn 3 for like Mindswipe X1. But the real power of this card is when you get to the late game, you can sit on a Mindswipe. Your opponent, sometimes from a duress or a Thoughtseize, knows that it's in your hand, and they get in this position where they can't really play a spell because they know you will Mindswipe for like 8 or 10 damage and kill them. But they also can't do nothing because they know eventually your Lightning Strikes and Riddles of Lightnings and your other finishers are going to take over the game and kill them anyway. So Mindswipe, it's been really impressive. That card is pretty powerful. Anyway, we have 2 real finishers. Well, maybe 3, I guess, depending on how you count. Keranos, God of Storms. Like I said, it will never be animated, so it's just an indestructible legendary enchantment that when we draw our first card, we reveal it. If it's a land, we get to draw another card. If it's a non-land, we get to Lightning Bolt something. So basically it sits out there, draws us extra cards, and eventually Lightning Bolts our opponent's face until they die. Also have Ugin the Spirit Dragon. Both Keranos and Ugin are just permanents that Lightning Bolt, I guess. That's most typically what they're used for, although sometimes we'll use the negative X ability on Ugin to wipe the board. And then we have Riddle of Lightning. Riddle of Lightning is almost a finisher. It's also our best answer to something like a Siege Rhino. But Riddle, this card hasn't really seen any play this go around in Standard. Basically, you pay 3 and 2 red for an instant. You choose a target creature or player, then you scry 3, reveal the top card of your library, and Riddle does damage equal to its converted mana cost to that creature or player. So we have a lot of scry in this deck, a lot of ways to dig through, to keep cycling through our deck and make sure we find the right things. Riddle does that, but it also often provides 8 damage, because not only do we have Ugin, which costs 8, but we have a copy of Treasure Cruise, which is... We would rather be playing 5 Dig Through Times, I think, but since you can only play 4 Dig Through Times, we have to play 1 Treasure Cruise, and then the 4 Dig Through Times, which also, even though we often cast them for 1 or 2 mana, because of their delve cost, actually cost 8. So it's not that unlikely that we cast a Riddle of Lightning for 8 damage. We have a bunch more burn. We have 4 copies of Lightning Strike, 1 in a red, 3 damage to target creature or player. We have 3 copies of Magma Jet. This card's been pretty impressive. Been happy to have that in our deck. And we also have 2 copies of Anger of Gods in the main deck. Anger of Gods is the most high variance card in this deck. It is either the absolute best card in the deck if we're playing against like a Sidisi Whip deck, playing against a Death Mist Raptor Den Protector deck, playing against Mono Red Aggro or a Tarka Red. Anger of Gods is close to unbeatable. It's basically just a 3 mana Plague Win. But then if you're playing Esper Dragons or Abzan Control, something that's going Courser into Siege Rhino, Anger is one of the worst cards in our deck. So that's why we only have 2 in the main. Just apart from the burn, we have a a bunch of ways to cycle through our deck. I mentioned Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. Those are the most powerful. But we also have 3 copies of Anticipate. Basically, 1 in a blue instant. Look at the top 3, put 1 in your hand, rest on the bottom. And we also have 2 copies of Steam Augury, which is 2 blue and a red for a reverse fact or fiction. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You sort them into 2 piles, and then your opponent chooses which pile to put in your hand and the other one to your graveyard. The synergy with this card and our Digs and Treasure Cruise is actually pretty significant. I had a pile the other day where 5 cards revealed were Treasure Cruise and 4 lands. So I split the Treasure Cruise on one side, the 4 lands on the other side, and our opponent basically had a decision. Either they give us 4 lands, which isn't that bad. I mean, raw card advantage is fine. Or they give us 1 Treasure Cruise that we get to cast for cheap because they're dumping 4 lands into our graveyard. So this card is overperformed for being a worse version of Fact or Fiction. So finishers, burn spells, ways to cycle through our deck. Last piece of the puzzle is Counterspells. 4 dissolves, basically counter target a spell for 1 and 2 blue, and you get to scry 1. 1 copy of Dissipate, counter target spell for 1 and 2 blue. If it's countered, you get to exile it instead of putting it in your graveyard. Not sure on this split. I think Dissipate, because of the presence of Haven of the Spirit Dragon, we might want more than 1 copy. I'm thinking maybe like 3 dissolves and 2 dissipates might be better than the 4-1 split. I think you do want 5 of these 3 mana counters in the main deck. I'm just not sure on the right numbers. Dissolve is, against any random spell, Dissolve is better, but against Haven decks, I think Dissipate is the superior option. And then we also have 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke, which sort of like our Anger of the Gods. It's like a reverse Anger of the Gods. Anger of the Gods, best card against aggro little creature decks, worst against control decks and big creature decks. Disdainful Stroke, pretty much a mulligan if you're playing mono red, but it's one of the best counters you can have if you're playing against Esper Dragons, Abzan Control, any of those big creature or control decks, because it hits their draw spells, it hits their finishers, hits their Siege Rhinos. As for the mana base, 7 islands, 6 mountains. We made a couple budget concessions for Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds, if you have them sitting around, you could be playing a Scryland in this slot. But Evolving Wilds isn't as bad as I imagined. With all of our big delve spells, the Dig Through Times and the Treasure Cruises, Evolving Wilds, sure, the land still comes into play tapped, but it also fuels our graveyard and makes our digs and cruises a bit cheaper. So there is some synergy, as awkward as that seems. Then 4 copies of Radiant Fountain. Radiant Fountain is kind of an all-star in this deck. I am amazed at how powerful it is. I'm amazed that sometimes I am casting Dig Through Time specifically with the hope that I find a Radiant Fountain of all things. It comes into play, it's colorless, gains you 2 life. This deck doesn't stabilize quickly. It does stabilize in most matchups, but it doesn't do it fast. Radiant Fountain can buy you a turn or 2 to get to that point of stabilization. Swiftwater Cliffs, kind of the same thing, a cheap dual option. Also gains 1 life, not as impressive as Radiant Fountain, but it's still something. And then 1 copy of Haven. As we talked about, this deck is a little light on finishers, the 1 Keranos and the 1 Ugin. Haven takes care of situations where we might get both our Keranos and our Ugin Thoughtseized. Haven can get back our Ugin and give us another chance at finishing the game. As for the sideboard, Negate comes in against control decks. Also, probably better than Disdainful Stroke against the tokeny mono red bills that are playing Hordling Outburst and Dragon Fodder, things like that. Disdainful Stroke, this is probably better than Dissolve or Dissipate against the big creature decks with Siege Rhinos, also against Esper Dragons. Nullify, haven't really brought this one in much. Problem is it costs double blue, and our mana base is not that great at having double blue on turn 2. So I just haven't used it much. Probably could replace it with something else. Wild Slash, mostly there against fast aggro, especially mono red. Good way to deal with Zergo Bellstriker, Fire Drinker Satyr, any of those quick 1-drops. Anger of the Gods, like I said, if you're playing Sidisi Whip, maybe Abzan aggro, mono red aggro, Tarka red, any of those decks, you want all 4 angers. That's just so good. It's one of the best cards, if not the best card in your deck. At the same time, if you're playing one of the decks where it's not good, Esper Dragons, Abs and Control, then you can take those out and replace, like swap the Angers for Disdainful Strokes, which are good in those matchups. So there is definitely some ways to swing certain matchups after board. Crater's Claw, these I think should be roasts. The idea with Crater's Claw when I put them in here was that it's another way to finish off our opponent, and sometimes it does come in and finish off our opponent, but it's also a way to deal with a Siege Rhino, which our deck isn't very good at. Our deck really needs Riddle of Lightning, either that or to string together like multiple Lightning Strikes or Magma Jets. Crater's Claw, in theory, can just come in and kill a Siege Rhino. The problem is it's sorcery speed, and it would cost 6 mana to kill a Siege Rhino, which taps us out and puts us in a bad position. Probably, and I haven't had that much trouble killing people without the Crater's Claw, so I think that those should just be roasts. Pearl Lake Ancient, also not sure if it's necessary. In theory, it's good against control decks, but haven't had to use it very often, and I tend to beat control with this deck anyway, because we can actually just out-control them. Unless they resolve an Ashiok early in the game while we have our shields down, we can usually out-control them. And Volcanic Visions, I don't know about this card. In theory, it can sweep away a whole board full of Coursers and Siege Rhinos while getting us back a dig through time. We're so often exiling our graveyard, though, we don't always have a great target in there. And I guess the idea is if you get up to about 1,000,000 mana, you can dig for it, find the Volcanic Visions, get back the dig, deal 8 damage, and dig again the next turn. So, I don't know. Haven't cast it one single time with this deck. I think I brought it in once and never drew it. So, just something to test out, but that could be another slot that could be up for grabs. Anyway, had a ton of fun playing this deck. Surprisingly competitive. The biggest struggle seems to be Siege Rhinos or other like big-butted creatures. Not so much in control decks because they're slow enough that we can just out-control them. But like decks that have early pressure backed up by Siege Rhino can be a problem because their creatures just get around Anger of the Gods, and Siege Rhino is just such a beating. If a deck goes turn 2 Fleecemane Lion, turn 3 Courser of Crewfix, they already have 5 power on the board, so we can't really sit on our counterspells. We need to be trying to deal with these creatures, but we also know they have Siege Rhino, maybe Wingmate Rock, to back that up, so if we do start casting our burn spells, they get a chance to resolve even more powerful threats. So that matchup can be rough. I think that putting 3 roasts in the sideboard, maybe in place of the Volcanic Visions and Crater's Claws, goes a long way to shoring that up, just because then we have a realistic and mana-efficient way to kill a Siege Rhino. And then we can tap out to kill a Fleecemane Lion or something, and not worry so much about the Siege Rhino that follows. Other than that, though, very good against aggro. Seems good against control. Like, I've been winning most of my matchups, and one matchup where I didn't win against the control deck was due to a misclick. Anyway, yeah, I had a ton of fun playing this deck this week, and I hope you enjoyed the videos.